Welcome back to the Guy Reviews channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, something I've always wanted to do, and talk about my life as growing up dyslexic, maybe pass on a few tips I've learned on how to deal with being dyslexic, and hopefully help somebody who maybe is dyslexic, parents of somebody who's dyslexic, or maybe just know somebody who is. Maybe this video will help you. Now, this is not the normal content I do here, but if you like it, do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up. It really does help us because it lets YouTube know you enjoy what we do here. And if you're here for all my other videos, we'll be back tomorrow with a regular Guy Reviews video. But today, I wanted to just kind of dive into my experience being dyslexic and share my thoughts on it and the tips I've learned over time. Now, dyslexia is kind of a very broad diagnosis. It covers a wide range of different learning disabilities, really. And that really comes down to the fact that dyslexia comes down to your brain structure and how it works. Now, no two brains are the same, and because of that, no two cases of dyslexia are exactly the same. Now, they may have some general traits I'll get into a little bit later, but just keep that in mind that dyslexia is different for everybody, and it may affect you differently. Now, for me, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, where dyslexia was finally being understood as a condition, a learning disability, but it really wasn't fully understood. It wasn't much until after I graduated high school into the 2000s that they started discovering, due to MRIs and taking people who passed away who are dyslexic and analyzing their brains and discovering that the structure of the brains are very different before we really understood what was happening. And because of that, today it's a lot easier to be dyslexic than it was when I was a kid. Now, with that said, it still can be very difficult. It doesn't mean suddenly we're going to cure dyslexia. You can't. It's a brain condition that comes down to the way the brain is structured. If you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link in the show notes down below, where you can read an article on the scientific studies related to the development of the brain, the differences between a dyslexic person and somebody who is not. Now, this resulted in a lot of struggles for me growing up. In second grade, my second grade teacher told my mom, take him out of school. He's never going to learn to read. He will never learn to read and will never be successful. Now, thankfully for me, my mom said, I'm not going to accept that. And she fought very hard for me, got me into a different school with programs for dyslexic people, and helped me become successful, eventually make the dean's list in college, become a successful business person. Now, everybody's life is different with that. It was definitely not an easy path. Back in the 90s, when I was in high school, the high school I went to had a learning resource room, but no specific dyslexic programs. And the worst part was, if I took any assistance in it, they thought that was unfair to the other kids in the class. So they would say, hey, if you go to the resource room and get help maybe with some extra tutoring, or you get help with having your test read to you, as opposed to reading it yourself, I'll talk more about that in a little bit, then best you can do is a B-. So if I got 100% right, I would get a B-. That left me in a tough position because it was actually sometimes best for me not to, because a C on a regular grade level would be a C, which isn't a horrid grade. But if I had used assistance and ended up with a C, well, B-, that's basically a failing grade right there, right in the border of it. So for me, high school was very, very difficult, and school is now. So I'm very excited to see the new offerings out there, the new programs, and the fact that most schools, I'm sure there's still out there who really don't do a lot for dyslexic kids, but most schools are creating programs and creating systems to help kids. And that's what I hope to help with in this video. Now, real quick, what is dyslexia? Now, it's basically a reading disorder, is the ultra simple layman's version of it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. So it turns out, thanks to MRIs, thanks to studies of brains and looking at people who pass away who are dyslexic, it turns out the actual structure of the brain is a little bit different. The sizes of the different hemispheres can be different. The areas that process written languages are not always the same as somebody who doesn't have dyslexia. Now, because of that, it can be a little bit different. I'm dyslexic, but my brain can be a little bit different than from you who's dyslexic, and we may experience it differently. I struggle a lot more with the idea that remembering words. Like, I can read pretty well, I can understand the big pictures, But I often struggle remembering like people's names unless I have an image I can really associate that with. If I've never met you and I don't really have a face I can put next to that name, I often struggle with names. Now, I have found workarounds for that. Associating a name or an object with an image works really well. On the flip side, I have a very close to photographic memory. If I drive a route once, I can typically keep driving it over and over again without needing instructions, just because I can remember, oh yeah, I can remember this street, I can remember this turn, I can remember what's coming up. Now, it's not a perfect photographic memory, but it is a trade-off there. So I actually think my dyslexia hasn't been necessarily a hindrance once I learned how to deal with it. It actually helped me a lot. And once I learned the tricks, once I learned associations of certain names and things to images in my mind, it really helped my ability for dyslexia. But I would really encourage you, if you are dyslexic, you know somebody who's dyslexic, you're a parent of somebody who's dyslexic, check out the link. I'll put it as a pinned first comment too, and in the show notes. There you'll be able to read a whole scientific section about how the brains are different, what that means for processing all this. Because dyslexia is a permanent condition. It's not something you're going to treat because it goes down to the actual structure of the brain. And there's even talks about using MRIs to diagnose dyslexia. Can they look at your brain when you're young to say, oh, the different sections of this brain are processing information this way. This kid is probably dyslexic. So check that out. But for me, that's where I struggle a lot. So 3 tips for dealing with dyslexia that I have learned over time. Number 1, take responsibility for yourself. Now, this was a hard one a little bit, especially when I got in my 20s, because I had my mom who fought night and day for me. She fought very hard to come out there and make sure I got the help I needed in order to be successful. And then it came into college and my young professional career, and it came on me to be responsible for myself. And that's kind of a big life lesson for a lot of people, is having to take responsibility to be like, hey, I know my rights in college. I know what kind of help should be offered to me that I'm eligible for, and I had to fight for it. Now, back then, there was a lot of teachers who didn't really understand dyslexia. I had, for instance, a college professor once when I talked to him about taking my test at the Learning Center, because they offered a reader, because I can process information a lot better audibly than I can visually. And when he asked, well, how do I know this isn't like one of your friends reading the exam who's going to give you all the answers? In high school, some of the teachers I went to high school with were actually the same teachers who my mom had. Some of them were retiring when I was there. Some retired shortly after. My mom always said she thought they were old when she went, and now they were really old when I was there. And they kind of had an old school mentality about learning disabilities, which was basically like, it doesn't exist, and we don't really believe in this whole dyslexic thing. So you gotta kind of be able to stand up and say, I am going to fight for myself. For example, one time my college had the thing where you could request a audio reader to read you the test so you could do it yourself. Now, with that, you had to do it 1 week out. I remember my college went to this online system. Before, you had a paper thing and you scanned it, emailed them, dropped it off, faxed it to them even back then in the day. But you could do it. Well, the online system, I remember one day, it just wasn't working. The teacher announced a test for the next week. It was they had like 4 or 5 throughout the whole semester. I tried to do it, got errors. I got the paper because I remember previously I'd been told, oh, you can use this paper one as a backup. So I turned in the paper. I said, hey, I was trying to do it online, kept giving me an error. The testing lady, who was new, said, well, this isn't acceptable. We can kick you out of the program for using paper requests when you weren't authorized to. And I was like, what? I'm like, okay, it's after hours. It was a night class, so it's not like you were in your office. I couldn't call you. I had until midnight to do it. The teacher had announced it that day. I went down to the head of the resource department at the university, and I complained. I said, hey, this isn't fair. I did everything I thought was right. Your new computer system just kept giving me errors, wouldn't let me through. Why am I being threatened to be kicked out of the program just because of that? And because of that, and I guess some other people complained, eventually that person was replaced. and I was not removed from the program, even though she recommended I be removed because I didn't properly fill out a form to get my test read to me. So be assertive, be willing to fight for yourself, be willing to go out there and get the resources you need. Do your own research. Don't count on the school to give you everything you need. For example, I listen to books better than I do reading a textbook. Not all my textbooks were available back then in audio. There are whole programs for the blind and dyslexic to get most textbooks in audio, but some of the textbooks that they said they couldn't get their hands on in audio format at my college turned out to be on this brand new service, well back then it was brand new, called Audible, which is now owned by Amazon. It's got a huge collection of audiobooks and some textbooks. That made it possible, especially in my English classes where I had to read a bunch of books and then write papers on them. Being able to listen to the book was a huge improvement for me. But it came down to me doing the research on that. Finding Audible, which wasn't very well known back then, and going out. So number one, go out there, fight for yourself, and don't be afraid to dig in your heels and say, this isn't right. I know you may be the employee at this university, but I'm gonna fight for myself to get what I need. Number two, use technology. Back when I was in elementary school, my mom had a typewriter for me, which was huge. And I actually did a lot of my later elementary schoolwork on it. It was one of those high-end ones at the time, and that really helped my ability to excel. Later, into my college years, I got those early text-to-speech programs and more. Nowadays, there's so many more options. Being able to record classes, get the audio of them, and listen to them as somebody who learns better that way. The text-to-speech programs, the speech-to-text programs. You know, Word actually even has it built in for Microsoft now. You don't need to spend hundreds of dollars to get a program that will take your words and turn them into text, which makes writing papers for dyslexic people sometimes a lot easier. Really do your research. Take advantage of it. To this day, I use a lot of programs. Grammarly, I'm not getting paid for any of this, but Grammarly is one I use, which is a grammar and spelling program, which is a huge help. I use a lot of notepads on my phone. I write a lot of stuff down. As a dyslexic person who struggles with words, it may sound weird. But if I'm, for instance, trying to get a list of products I need, I write it all down. I don't trust that I'm going to remember all of them. Or if it's somebody's news name, okay, I'm meeting so-and-so who I've never met, I don't have any visual representation in my mind to link them to, I write it down. I write a lot of notes down. I write a lot of names and lists and different things. So use technology, use your phone, use your tablet. A lot of people may say, well, that's not how you go through school. For me, that's the reality. That is when you get in the workforce, those are going to be the tools around you in today, tablets, phones, computers, and more. If you can learn to use them now in school, you can learn to use them out in the workforce. So keep that in mind. And lastly, don't let this hold you back. Now, one of the things I screwed up with in my 20s is I knew I was dyslexic. I knew I struggled through high school. I struggled through college. Even though I made the dean's list twice, it was tough going through college. It was not something I would want to go through. I know a lot of people who miss college, miss high school, would love to go back. You could not pay me to go back to college or high school. But because of that, because of my fear of being embarrassed, because of my fear of not being able to actually do a job or do something I wanted to do because of my dyslexia, I didn't try. And it wasn't really until I hit my 30s that I said, hey, I'm going to go and put myself out there, take harder jobs, launch my own business, and more. And because of that, I found out, wow, I'm actually really good at this. And at times I thought I was even better than some of the other people out there. But I let myself hold myself back just because I assumed I'm dyslexic, I can't do it. If you learn anything from this video, if I could tell you one thing would be is don't hold yourself back. Being dyslexic is not a big deal. Albert Einstein was dyslexic. I was dyslexic. I became very successful. A lot of people who are very intelligent, very successful are dyslexic. Now, you need to go out there and say, I'm not going to let this be something that holds me back. Not saying that dyslexia can't be a hurdle, can't be something a little bit difficult to work through, but you can work through it. You can go forward. You just got to adapt yourself. You got to take responsibility. You got to find the path that works for you. You can't give up on it. And that will be a big difference there. Now, these are what worked for me. These are kind of the big things that stood out for me. Fighting for myself, not letting schools say no. For instance, when I was a kid, we went to a private school. They didn't offer testing. And the public school was dragging their feet to get myself tested to find out if I was dyslexic in first grade. So my mom found a learning center in town which had accredited doctors who did learning disabilities testing. And then she said it was actually surprisingly not that expensive to do. Nowadays, you can actually request to be tested at multiple public schools, even if you're not a student there. If you're homeschooled, if you go to a private school. Back when I was a kid, that was something that most public schools wouldn't do. Nowadays, most do. And don't be afraid to look around. Many schools are different. Some schools will have an excellent dyslexic program. Some will have a horrible one. Now, you may need to take advantage of things like school of choice, maybe a charter school or a private school if you can afford it, to find the best education for you. Also, don't be afraid. If they say, hey, well, these are the tools we have. Oh, we don't have that audiobook. We don't have that tool. Do your own research. Audible, with their $20 a month subscription service, got me a lot of my textbooks through college that I needed for things like English classes. I think I even got like a political science textbook on there once too, which I wasn't able to get from the college in an Audible format. And then there were free text-to-audio programs and more. So fight for yourself, have confidence in yourself, take responsibility for yourself. Even if you're not dyslexic, that's a great life tip. Well, I hope this video maybe helped you learn something new, maybe help somebody who's going through this get through it a little easier. It can be done. Dyslexia, I would actually say, became a great asset because my brain worked a little bit different. The ability to visualize a lot of things actually helped me process information differently. I think has helped me a lot in my career paths over time. So overall, I would say dyslexia was a big benefit, even though it took me a long time to get through it, to realize it and get to the next step. Hopefully in today's world of 2020, when I record this, with so many schools now taking it seriously, even having dedicated dyslexic programs, something I could only dream of when I was a student in school, all the way through high school, and even in college where they started to realize it more, it was still very difficult because the programs were very basic, very limited. In the case of my high school, actually punitive if you try to take advantage of them. So, are you dyslexic? I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, leave me a comment. I'll try to answer them as best I can. If you're new here, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up. It really does help us because it lets YouTube know you enjoy what we do here. Hopefully we can help you learn something new, this time about dyslexia. Thanks for your support. I'll be back tomorrow with another video, back to one of our regular videos.